John had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, a simple guy from Earth with no extraordinary skills or experiences. His life was predictable: work, eat, sleep, repeat. But one day, everything changed, all because of a strange little envelope that arrived at his doorstep. It was a quiet afternoon when he first noticed it. He had just returned home from his mundane office job, the kind where every day felt like the one before. He was about to drop his bag on the couch when his eyes landed on the small, shiny envelope resting on the kitchen counter. It had no return address, just an unusual symbol stamped on the front. Curiosity got the best of him. He picked it up, examined it, and carefully opened it. Inside was a beautifully crafted invitation. The paper shimmered with a metallic glow, and the writing was unlike anything he had seen before. It wasn't in any language he recognized, but somehow he could read it perfectly. It said, "You are invited to witness the union of Princess Allura and Lord Thaler at the Great Hall of Zorath. Please join us for this extraordinary event." John blinked, then blinked again. What in the world was this? A wedding invitation from aliens? He didn't know what to make of it, and for a moment he thought it might be a prank. But the invitation felt too real, too official. It didn't seem like something anyone would make up. Besides, there was no return address, no way to contact anyone. He sat there staring at the invitation, unsure of what to do. A wedding? With aliens? His mind raced. Maybe it was part of some sci-fi event or a promotion for an upcoming movie. But what if it wasn't? What if this was real? The more John thought about it, the more his curiosity got the better of him. He figured there was no harm in checking it out. If it turned out to be a joke, at least he'd have a good story to tell. And if it was real, well, he didn't want to miss the chance to see something truly extraordinary. So without a second thought, he decided to go. The next day, John followed the instructions on the invitation. He arrived at a small, secluded location, far from the bustling city. The area was unlike anything he had ever seen before. There were strange structures around him, glowing softly, as if the buildings themselves were alive. The air smelled different too, crisp and fresh, with a hint of something floral. John was unsure where to go, but he followed the signs and entered the large hall, which looked like a grand palace from another world. The architecture was breathtaking. Tall spires, swirling patterns on the walls, and delicate lights hanging from above. It was beautiful, but also otherworldly. He had never seen anything like it. Inside, the hall was filled with beings from countless different species, all talking, laughing, and preparing for the ceremony. There were tall, slender creatures with smooth silver skin, others with wings, and some that looked like walking plants. They didn't seem to notice him much, as they were all busy preparing for the main event. John felt a little out of place, standing there in his simple human clothes, but no one seemed to mind. He stood quietly, unsure of what to do. That's when he saw her, the bride. Princess Allura was unlike anything John had ever imagined. She was tall, with pale blue skin that shimmered like the sky just before dusk. Her hair was long and silver, cascading down her back in waves. Her eyes were a bright violet, almost glowing, and she carried herself with a regal grace that made everything around her seem to fade into the background. John couldn't take his eyes off her. She was breathtaking, but it wasn't just her beauty. There was something else about her, something that made John feel as if she had a power he couldn't understand. He didn't know what it was, but it was undeniable. Before he could fully process what he was seeing, one of the attendants approached. Him. "Are you the groom?" the alien asked with a voice that was soft but firm. John froze, his mind spinning. "The groom?" he asked, confused. "Yes," the alien said, nodding. "You are the one who has agreed to marry Princess Allura, correct? The ceremony is about to begin." John's heart raced. "What?" he stammered. "No, I'm just here as a guest. I didn't..." But before he could finish his sentence, another figure approached, a tall, armored alien with a stern expression. "The princess awaits," the alien said, bowing slightly. "You must join her." "Wait, hold on," John protested. "I'm not the groom. I don't even know what's going on." But no one seemed to be listening. They were all too focused on the ceremony, too intent on carrying out their roles. Before John could protest any further, he was gently but firmly ushered to the front of the hall. There, standing in front of everyone, was Princess Allura, waiting for him. Her violet eyes locked with his, and for a moment it felt as though the entire universe had stopped. John's mind was in a complete whirlwind. How had he gone from an ordinary guy on Earth to being the accidental groom in an alien wedding? What was going on? But there was no time to question it. The ceremony was about to begin. John stood frozen in place, staring at the alien princess who was waiting for him at the altar. His heart raced in his chest as he tried to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't be real, could it? How had he gone from casually reading an odd invitation to standing in the middle of an alien wedding, being mistaken for the groom? The princess, Allura, was standing with a calm but expectant expression on her face. She was beautiful, almost ethereal, but there was something more to her that John couldn't quite put his finger on. She wasn't just a princess. She seemed to hold an aura of power and grace that made everything around her pale in comparison. John glanced around, feeling lost in the vast hall full of unfamiliar faces. The creatures in the room, with their odd shapes and colors, were all whispering among themselves, seemingly waiting for something to happen. The quiet hum of the room was broken by the sounds of clinking glass and hushed conversations, but all of it seemed distant to John, as though he were in a dream. One of the attendants, a tall figure with long, flowing silver robes, approached. "John." The alien had a strange but friendly smile, and its voice when it spoke was smooth like velvet. "Please come," the attendant urged gently. "The princess awaits. You must join her for the ceremony to proceed." John looked at the attendant, his mind spinning. "But I don't belong here," he protested. "I'm not the groom. I don't even know what's going on." The attendant simply smiled, unfazed by his confusion. "It is already decided," the alien said. "You have been chosen, human. The union must happen." Before John could speak again, a soft but firm voice interrupted him. It was Princess Allura, her violet eyes gazing at him with a mix of curiosity and quiet determination. "Come," she said softly, her voice calm but commanding. "The ceremony is about to begin, and we have little time." John's mind was racing. What did she mean, we have little time? What was going on here? None of this made sense. He glanced at her again, this time noticing the sadness behind her eyes. She wasn't angry, but there was a deep sense of resignation in her gaze, almost as if she had no choice in this matter. It made John feel uneasy. He wasn't sure why, but he had the feeling that this wasn't just a wedding, it was something far more significant. With no other option, John reluctantly took a step forward. The moment he did, the attendants quickly surrounded him, leading him toward the princess. They moved with such precision and grace that it was as though they had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. As they reached the altar, John found himself standing beside Allura. The room had grown completely silent. All eyes were now on him. He felt the weight of their gazes pressing down on him, as though they were all waiting for him to do something. But he had no idea what that was. The priest, an ancient-looking being with a long silver beard and skin that shimmered like starlight, stepped forward. He began chanting in a language John couldn't understand, his voice rising and falling in strange, melodic rhythms. The sound of the chant filled the room with an eerie yet beautiful tone. John stood there, trying his best to blend into the background, but it was impossible. Every single being in the hall seemed to be paying attention to him, watching his every move. Allura turned toward him, her face serene but with a touch of sadness. She looked at him for a long moment, her violet eyes meeting his. "You don't understand," she whispered, "but you must marry me now, it's the only way." John shook his head, his thoughts racing. "I don't understand. I'm just an ordinary guy, I don't even know you, this isn't what I signed up for." She placed a hand on his arm, and for the briefest of moments, John felt a strange sense of warmth and connection between them. I never wanted this either, she said quietly. But my people, my family, are forcing me into this marriage for political reasons. If we don't go through with it, the consequences will be dire. John was stunned. He could feel the weight of her words, the desperation in them. This wasn't just some strange alien wedding. This was a life-changing moment for both of them. She wasn't marrying him out of love. She was marrying him because she had no other choice. What happens if I don't marry you? John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Allura's eyes darkened, and for a split second, John saw a flicker of fear. If you don't marry me, she said, my people will see it as a betrayal. There are powerful forces at play here, forces that will stop at nothing to get what they want. John's mind was reeling. He didn't know what to do. On one hand, he felt completely out of place in this alien world. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the pain and fear in Allura's voice. She didn't want to be here, just like him. She was trapped, just like him. Before he could make another decision, the priest's voice grew louder, signaling that the moment had arrived. You must now say the words, the priest called, his voice echoing through the hall. You, human, and you, Princess Allura, are bound by the ancient bond. Speak your vows. Allura turned to him, her expression gentle but firm. Please, she said softly. Say the vows. It's the only way. John swallowed hard. He had no idea what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain. He was about to make a choice that would change his life forever. And whether he liked it or not, his future was now intertwined with that of the alien princess standing before him. The ceremony was underway, but John's mind was still spinning. He had just said the vows, words he didn't fully understand, with a room full of strangers watching his every move. But the most troubling part of all this was Princess Allura. She wasn't happy, and it was clear that this wedding wasn't something she wanted. As the priest continued his chanting, the princess turned her attention to John. Her eyes, which had seemed so full of power and mystery earlier, now looked soft, almost sad. She gave him a small, uncertain smile, and he could feel her discomfort radiating from her. The guests were all caught up in the ceremony, but John could tell they weren't truly focused on him. They were watching the princess, the one they all seemed to revere. It wasn't about him at all, it was about her. And yet somehow he was now tangled in her fate. After the vows were completed, the priest signaled the end of the ceremony, and the crowd began to disperse. People congratulated the bride and groom, their voices full of excitement, but John could hardly keep up with the rapid flow of alien traditions and customs. He didn't know how to act, what to say, or even where to go next. Allura, however, led him quietly away from the crowd. She walked with grace, her feet barely touching the ground as she moved through the grand hall. John tried to keep pace, feeling like a child following an adult. They reached a secluded room at the back of the Yao palace, away from the watchful eyes of the crowd. Once the door closed behind them, Allura let out a long, quiet sigh. John could see the tension in her shoulders, the exhaustion on her face. I didn't want this, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. I never wanted to marry anyone, especially not a stranger. John looked at her with confusion and concern. Then why didn't you stop the ceremony, he asked. You didn't seem like you were happy to be there. Allura turned to face him, her violet eyes searching his face for a moment. I couldn't, she said, her voice tight. I am bound by my family's wishes. My marriage was arranged long before I was born. The people expect it. If I don't go through with this. Her voice trailed off, and John could see that the weight of what she was saying was weighing heavily on her. This wasn't just a simple wedding. It was a political move, a power play among alien factions. She wasn't marrying for love. She was marrying for the sake of her people, her family, and the future of her world. Who's behind all of this? John asked, his voice softer now. Who's forcing you to do this? Allura hesitated, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of a nearby table. It's my father, she said at last, her voice full of frustration. He's the ruler of this planet, and he's made alliances with other powerful beings. My marriage to Lord Thaler was meant to secure those alliances. If I don't follow through with this, it will jeopardize everything. My family, my kingdom, it will all fall apart. John's heart sank. He could see the pain in her eyes, the way she tried to hide her fear behind a mask of composure. She wasn't just a bride in a foreign land. She was a prisoner of her own circumstances. Then why not run away? John asked, the question coming out before he could stop it. Why not leave all of this behind? Allura looked at him, surprised by the suggestion. I can't just leave, she replied quietly. It's not that simple. There are too many forces at play here. My father controls more than just this world. He has power over entire star systems. If I left, it would start. A war and countless innocent lives would be lost. John shook his head, trying to process everything she had said. He had never thought of things like that before. Galactic politics, power struggles, and the way entire civilizations were controlled by a few powerful families. He was just a man from Earth, and none of this made sense to him. But there has to be another way, he said, his voice firm. You don't deserve this. No one should be forced into a marriage they don't want. Allura's eyes softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small, sad smile. I know, she said, but I don't see a way out. John didn't know how to fix everything. He had never faced anything like this in his life. But one thing was clear. Allura needed help, and he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He didn't know how, but he knew he had to try. I'll help you, John said, his voice filled with determination. Whatever it takes, I'll help you get out of this. We'll find a way together. Allura looked at him, disbelief flickering in her eyes. You don't even know what you're getting into, she whispered. You could be putting your life at risk. John smiled faintly. At this point, I think I've already done that, he said. But I'm not going to let you go through this alone. There was a long pause as Allura studied him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. Thank you, she said quietly. I don't know if there's a way out, but thank you for offering. John nodded, his resolve growing stronger. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was determined to help her. Somehow, together, they would find a way to change the course of their lives and the fate of an entire galaxy. The weight of Allura's words lingered in the air long after the conversation had ended. John couldn't shake the feeling that they were both trapped in a situation far beyond their control. Allura was a prisoner of her own family, forced into a marriage she didn't want, and now he was caught up in it all. He wasn't sure how he could help her, but one thing was clear. He had to try. Over the next few days, they spent a lot of time together, mostly in quiet conversations in private rooms away from prying eyes. John learned more about Allura's situation, about the power struggles, the political alliances, and the forces that were pushing her toward a marriage she had no say in. She spoke about her family's expectations, the duty she felt to her people, and the weight of the responsibilities she carried. But as she spoke, John could see the cracks in her mask. Despite her strength, she was desperate for freedom, just like him. One evening, as they sat in a small, dimly lit room deep within the palace, Allura's eyes filled with a new kind of determination. We have to leave, she said, her voice low but firm. It's the only way. John looked up at her, his heart racing. Leave? You mean run away? Allura nodded. I know it's dangerous. I know it's risky. But staying here means living a life that isn't mine. If we don't do something now, I'll be stuck in this marriage and everything will be lost. My future, my freedom. I can't let that happen. John thought for a moment. He understood the urgency in her voice. He couldn't stand the idea of her being forced into a life she didn't want. But how could they escape? The palace was full of guards, and the whole planet was under the watchful eye of her father's empire. There was no way to leave unnoticed. We'll have to be careful, John said, his voice steady. We can't just walk out of here. We'll need a plan, a good one. Allura agreed. I've been thinking about it. There's a place, a neutral zone on the outskirts of the galaxy. It's far from my father's reach, and there's no way for them to track us. If we can get there, we'll be safe. But getting there won't be easy. John's mind raced. He knew they had to act quickly, but the more he thought about it, the more complicated it seemed. Escaping from the palace would be one thing, but leaving the planet itself? That would take careful planning. We'll need help, John said. I can't do this alone. Neither of us can. Allura's eyes brightened at the thought. I know someone, she said. A trusted ally. A smuggler who owes me a favor. If anyone can help us escape, it's him. But we have to be quick. He's not easy to find, and the longer we wait, the more dangerous it will become. John nodded. He wasn't sure how they were going to pull this off, but he knew that they couldn't stay in the palace any longer. The risk of being discovered was growing by the minute. I'm in, John said, his voice determined. Let's do it. Over the next few days, Allura and John made their plans in secret. They avoided the eyes of the royal guards and the palace staff, careful not to raise suspicion. Allura, despite her royal status, had spent much of her life learning how to move unnoticed in the palace, and she taught John the tricks she had learned over the years. They snuck through hidden passages, made plans for supplies, and even talked about how to blend in once they were away from the palace. Allura had always been the princess, highly visible, always in the public eye. But now, for the first time in her life, she was going to be someone else, a fugitive. And she had to rely on John, someone she barely knew, to help her. The night before they were to leave, John and Allura sat together in the weir, the small room they had been using as their base of operations. Allura was quiet, her eyes distant as she thought about the plan. John could sense that she was nervous, but also filled with a kind of hope that he hadn't seen before. I don't know what happens after we leave, Allura said softly, breaking the silence. This could change everything. We'll be on the run with no home, no family, nothing. John looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision they were about to make. We'll figure it out. We'll stick together and we'll find a way. You're not alone in this. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was a quiet confidence, a promise that he meant every word. I trust you, she said quietly. John didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. He had already come too far to turn back now. The following night, under the cover of darkness, John and Allura made their move. They snuck out of the palace, slipping past the guards and using the secret passages Allura had shown him. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they made their way to the palace's outer walls, where the smuggler was supposed to meet them. They had no idea what awaited them, but they were determined to escape, together. Whatever the future held, they knew one thing. Their journey had just begun. The night air was cool as John and Allura moved quickly through the dark alleyways of the palace grounds. They kept their heads low, trying to remain unseen, every step taking them farther away from the life Allura had known. It was a tense silence that wrapped around them, the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on both their shoulders. John could feel the anxiety in the air, like a heavy fog surrounding them. They weren't just escaping from the palace anymore. They were escaping from everything that had ever been familiar to Allura. Her family, her world, and the future they had planned for her were all behind them now. The unknown awaited them, but there was no turning back. We're almost there, Allura whispered, her voice low but steady. I just hope the smuggler is still where he promised to be. John nodded, his own heart racing. They had no backup plan. They were relying on a stranger, someone Allura had only met a few times in the past. The thought of trusting someone they barely knew felt strange, but right now, it was the only option they had. They reached the edge of the palace grounds, where a small hidden transport docked near a dark corner. The smuggler, a tall and burly alien with green scales and piercing yellow eyes, was already waiting for them. He didn't say a word as they approached, his gaze flicking over Allura before resting on John. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of what they were about to do. "Are you ready?" the smuggler asked, his voice deep and gravelly. "The ship's ready to go, but you're not the only ones with a plan to leave." John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. The smuggler leaned in slightly, his gaze darting around. "There are others who've been planning an escape from this planet, and if you think your family's the only one with power here, you're wrong. The galaxy's on the brink of war, and your father's not the only one who'll be chasing you." Allura stiffened beside John. "War?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What do you mean?" The smuggler's yellow eyes narrowed. "Your father's political alliances, the marriage. It's all part of something bigger. People want control of the resources here, the kind of power your family holds. And it's not just your planet that's in the middle of this mess. Your family's actions have caused a ripple effect across several star systems." John's mind raced. He had thought they were just escaping a bad situation, a forced marriage, a life of duty. But now he was hearing about galactic politics, power struggles, and war. The stakes were much higher than he could have ever imagined. "This is bigger than just us," John said, trying to process it all. "It's not just your family's plans, they're affecting entire systems, aren't they?" Allura looked at him, her face pale. "I didn't know. I thought I was just a pawn in a game of politics. But now I see. We're at the center of something much bigger." The smuggler nodded grimly. "You have no idea how far your father's influence spreads, and now, with you running away, there's no telling what will happen. You've set things in motion, and others will try to stop you." John's eyes widened. He hadn't realized the kind of danger they were in. They weren't just running from her family. They were running from a whole galaxy that was now watching them. "Where do we go?" John asked, his voice determined. "We can't just hide forever." The smuggler's lips curled into a small, almost sad smile. "I know a place. A neutral zone where no one will find you. But getting there isn't simple. We'll have to avoid every patrol, every scout ship. There's a price for leaving this planet, and it's more than just a one-way ticket." Allura took a deep breath, her shoulders squared. "Then we'll pay it. I'm not going back. Not to the life I've known, and not to a world that wants to control me." The smuggler stepped aside and motioned for them to follow. "Then let's go," he said. "The clock's ticking." They boarded the ship, a small but well-equipped vessel that seemed to hum with the energy of advanced technology. As the doors closed behind them, John felt a strange sense of finality. They were leaving everything behind. Their future was uncertain, and the journey ahead would be anything but easy, but it was their only chance. As the ship lifted off the ground, John glanced out the window and watched the palace grow smaller and smaller until it was just a distant blur. It felt surreal. They had taken the first step into a new life, one filled with risks and dangers. But for the first time in what seemed like forever, John felt a spark of hope. They had made it this far. Allura sat beside him, her face thoughtful. "I can't believe it's really happening," she said quietly. "We're really leaving." John looked at her, offering a small, reassuring smile. "We're not just running away. We're choosing something better, a chance at freedom." She nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I hope you're right." As the ship entered the depths of space, John knew that they weren't just fleeing a forced marriage. They were fleeing a galaxy on the edge of war. They were fleeing an empire built on control and power. And as much as he wished things were different, he couldn't ignore the truth. Their escape had set something much larger in motion. Whatever happened next, they would have to face it together. The ship hummed steadily as it soared through the vastness of space. John sat by the window, watching as the stars passed by in a blur of white and silver. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe every time he looked out into the endless expanse. The universe was so much bigger than he had ever imagined, and now he and Allura were lost in it, far from everything they had once known. Beside him, Allura sat in silence, her gaze distant. The journey had been long, and though they were finally free of the palace, the tension between them hadn't lifted. They were still on the run, still being hunted. Every moment was filled with uncertainty. How much further? John asked, breaking the silence. He glanced over at Allura, who had been staring at the control panel in front of her. Not much, Allura replied, her voice low. We should be close to the neutral zone, but we have to be careful. We can't afford to get caught now. John nodded, understanding the weight of her words. They were only one step away from safety, but the galaxy was vast, and they were tiny in comparison. The neutral zone Allura had spoken about was a place where no one could track them. A sanctuary, of sorts, but even that wasn't guaranteed. With her father's reach across the stars, it wouldn't be long before they were pursued again. The smuggler pilot, a quiet alien who had kept mostly to himself, adjusted the ship's controls. We're almost there, he said. Keep an eye out for any patrols. We'll need to be quick. John exchanged a glance with Allura. She didn't look as confident as she had earlier. He could see the worry in her eyes, the doubt that had crept in as their journey continued. She was afraid of what they would find in the neutral zone, and even more so of what might happen once they got there. Do you trust him? John asked, nodding toward the pilot. They hadn't spoken much since they boarded the ship, and John still wasn't sure if the smuggler was truly on their side. Allura seemed to trust him, but John wasn't ready to take anything at face value. Allura glanced at the pilot and then back to John. I trust him because he's the only one who can get us out of here, but that doesn't mean I'm not nervous. There's no telling who will be waiting for us when we arrive. John sighed and leaned back in his seat, rubbing his face with his hands. We're really doing this, huh? He murmured. It still felt surreal. He had gone from an ordinary man on Earth to someone running for his life, caught in the middle of an alien political mess. And now, with the threat of war looming, they were both in even deeper than before. Allura turned to him, her eyes softening. We don't have a choice. I couldn't go back. I couldn't stay there and pretend to be someone I'm not. Not anymore. John smiled at her, though it was a bittersweet smile. I get it. I don't want to go back either. But there's no guarantee that this neutral zone will be safe. We'll figure it out, Allura said firmly, a new determination in her voice. Together. As the ship continued its journey through the stars, the distant glow of their destination appeared in the distance. It was a small speck at first, but as they approached, it grew larger. Allura's eyes narrowed as she watched the control panel, her fingers moving over the buttons with practiced ease. We need to be on high alert, Allura warned. There's no such thing as a truly safe place, not for us. If my father's spies are watching this sector, we won't have long before they spot us. John nodded. They had both known that their escape wouldn't be without risk, but now it felt more real than ever. There was no turning back. They were in it together. Minutes later, the smuggler pilot spoke again. We're entering the neutral zone now. Stay alert. I'm setting us down. The ship descended toward the surface of a small, hidden planet. The landscape below was unlike anything John had ever seen. There were no cities, no large buildings, only wild forests and open plains. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. For a moment, John allowed himself to relax, but he knew better than to get comfortable. The ship touched down softly on the ground, the engines humming quietly as they powered down. Allura stood up first, her eyes scanning the horizon. The smuggler pilot followed suit, his movement swift and practiced. This is where we part ways, the smuggler said gruffly, turning toward them. I've done my part. Now it's up to you to make sure you stay hidden. There are others in the neutral zone who'll help you, but you need to keep your heads low. Stay out of sight and don't trust anyone too easily. John nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and unease. Thanks, he said, though the word didn't feel like enough. The smuggler nodded once, then quickly turned and walked off, disappearing into the trees. Allura and John watched him go, unsure of what would happen next. Now what? John asked, turning to Allura. Allura took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Now, we find the people who can help us. We stay hidden, we figure out what to do next, and we make sure my father's people don't find us. John followed her gaze, understanding the seriousness of the situation. They weren't just escaping a wedding now. They were escaping a galaxy in turmoil. A war was brewing, and they had just stepped into the middle of it. "We'll make it," John said, his voice steady. "We have to." Allura nodded, her gaze hardening with resolve. "We will. Together." The days passed, slowly after they arrived at the neutral zone. The planet was peaceful, hidden away from the prying eyes of the galaxy, but it was also remote and uncertain. John and Allura spent their time quietly, staying out of sight and trying to figure out their next steps. They met a few people along the way, but no one could be fully trusted. In the neutral zone, trust was a luxury no one could afford. Everyone had their own secrets, their own agendas. And while the people they met seemed to welcome them with open arms, Allura knew better than to let her guard down. They found shelter in a small, isolated village at the edge of the forest, a place where the inhabitants were used to strangers coming and going. The village was quiet, surrounded by tall trees and rolling hills. It felt safe, but Allura knew that peace was fleeting. She had heard whispers about the dangers that were still out there. Spies from her father's empire, bounty hunters, and mercenaries all looking for her. John could see the toll the constant stress was taking on her. She had been through so much already: betrayal, fear, and uncertainty. He admired her strength, but he could also see the cracks in her composure, the moments when her guard slipped, and the weight of everything she had lost pressed down on her. One evening, as the sun began to set, Allura and John sat together on the edge of the village, watching the sky change colors. The air was cool, and the sounds of the village seemed distant, almost peaceful. But John knew that the calm was an illusion. "Do you think we'll ever be safe?" John asked, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but there was a weight to his words. Allura didn't answer immediately. She stared at the horizon, her eyes searching for something beyond the fading light. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I keep hoping that once we're far enough away, once we're out of my father's reach, things will get better. But the truth is, I'm not sure I'll ever be truly safe again. Not while there's a war brewing. Not while my family's empire is fighting to control everything." John understood. He had never been part of something this big, this dangerous. He had never been caught up in a galactic war, but now he was. And Allura wasn't just the princess she had once been. She was a symbol, a target, and a living reminder of the power struggles that defined this galaxy. "There has to be something we can do," John said, his voice filled with determination. "We can't just hide forever. We need to take action." Allura looked at him, her gaze piercing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and caution. "I mean, we can't just keep running. We have to make a choice. We can stay here and wait, hoping no one finds us. Or we can go back, find a way to end this and stop the war before it gets worse. We can't just sit back and let everything happen around us." Allura looked away, her eyes clouded with thought. "I never wanted to go back," she said quietly. "I thought I could escape my responsibilities, my family's expectations, but maybe you're right. Maybe running isn't enough anymore." John waited for her to continue, but she fell silent. The weight of the decision she had to make was clear. They could stay hidden in the neutral zone, safe for a time, but it would never be permanent. Or they could risk everything. Go back, confront the Empire, and try to change the course of the war. "I've been running my whole life," Allura said at last, her voice barely a whisper. "I've never been allowed to make my own choices, but maybe it's time to finally make one. Maybe it's time to fight." John's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen Allura this resolute, this determined. The fear that had once clouded her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. "If we go back," Allura continued, "it's not just about me anymore. It's about everything. The future of the galaxy, the lives of everyone who's been caught in this war. We can't just stand by and let it all fall apart." John nodded, his own resolve hardening. "We'll do it. We'll go back together. Whatever it takes, we'll fight." For the first time since they had left her father's palace, Allura smiled. It was small, but it was real. She turned to John, her eyes filled with a quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me." John reached out, taking her hand in his. "You're not alone in this, Allura. We're in this together. We'll figure it out." The decision was made. They would return to the heart of the Empire, to the chaos they had escaped. But this time, they wouldn't be passive observers. They would fight, not just for their own freedom, but for the future of the galaxy itself. As the stars began to appear in the sky above them, Allura and John stood together, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road would be long and the dangers would be great, but they had one another. And together they would stand against the empire that had once tried to control their lives. The final decision had been made. And now, their true journey was about to begin.